Professional medic risked her life by taking a bullet. Later her life was changed radically. The morning began with the alarm and an anxious glance at the phone screen. 6:43. Jessica Moran was already late. There was no time for coffee, and the familiar shuttle bus that usually took her from her home to Chicago General Hospital stopped with a thud at the 57th Street intersection and didn't go any further. The driver merely waved his hand saying, "You can walk from here, sorry girl." Jessica, without arguing, jumped off the step and dived into the morning breeze. It was cool, the city hadn't fully awakened, but the south side was alive with the smell of burnt oil, the clamor of the grocery store, and the whirring of old bicycles ridden by newspaper deliverymen. She didn't take the street she usually took, but walked deep into the neighborhood on 59th, and it was getting more unsettling by the minute. Neighborhoods weren't known for safety, especially at a time like this, especially alone. A tall man in a hoodie stood at a kiosk she'd never been to before. He seemed to blend in with the graffiti on the wall, his face hidden by the deep shadow of his hood, his hands ducking under his jacket. Jessica caught a glimpse of a metallic glow. At first she thought it was just someone's flask or lighter. But the man's body was too tense. He wasn't standing, he was waiting. And not just anyone, someone important. Oliver Hunt didn't fit into the landscape of the neighborhood. His light gray coat looked like it had just come out of a catalog. He held a paper cup of coffee in his hand and leafed through the latest issue of the Chicago Tribune as he stood at the counter. The salesman knew him, at least he nodded with a recognizable easy smile. He didn't come here often but sometimes liked to get a feel for the city, as his PR people said in interviews. What a multi-billionaire was doing in the city's poorest neighborhood at 7 in the morning was a separate question. But Jessica noticed the way he stood with his back to the world. No security. Without fear. Without the realization that his life hung in the balance at this very second. The man in the hoodie stepped forward slightly. His hand came out from under his jacket, and in it was something black, compact, protruding a gun. Jessica froze. For a few seconds, her mind refused to accept what she was seeing. She felt her heart clench. Everything was happening too fast. She could have turned around, called 911, screamed, all of it had flashed through her mind in a split second. But then her gaze darted behind Hunt's back. A kid. A boy about 7 years old, wearing a school uniform, carrying a backpack, standing at a newspaper stand picking out gum. Right in the line of fire. The decision came without words. No analysis. No logic. Just a body went forward. Jessica threw her bag on the sidewalk, accelerated, and sprinted across the street. Someone in the distance shouted, "Hey, watch out!" But the sounds didn't matter anymore. The thump of heels on the pavement, the wind in his ears, his breathing collapsed into a squeezed inhale. The man raised his weapon. Jessica jumped. Between him and the target. Right in the line of fire. The shot rang out deafeningly, like someone slamming a door in an empty basement. Her left shoulder exploded with pain, her body jerked backward. An instant later, she slammed into the edge of the counter, the back of her head hitting the metal corner. The air went out of her lungs, and all she could feel was the hot liquid slowly soaking her sleeve. The sound of the city abruptly disappeared. Only the ringing in her ears and black spots in front of her eyes. She fell onto her back, her breath ragged, her lips trembling but not uttering a sound. The last thing she caught before the world fell into darkness was that boy's face. Frightened. Rounded eyes. Then Hunt's figure leaning over, shouting something, his arms around her neck, someone calling for an ambulance, running footsteps. But it all fades away like water pouring through glass from the inside. Jessica loses consciousness. She doesn't know who she saved. Or if she even made it. The room was white, quiet, and smelled of something chemically fresh, as if the whole place had just been rewashed. Jessica slowly came to her senses, as if surfacing from the viscous darkness. First her hearing returned. The distant beeping of the machine, the short phrases of the staff, the muffled rumble of the gurney in the corridor. Then the pain. Sharp, piercing, shooting from the left shoulder to the chest. Trying to move her arm brought a wave of nauseating heat. She clenched her teeth. Someone immediately noticed she was awake. A woman's voice nearby whispered, "Jessica, don't move. You're in the hospital. You're safe." Safe is a strange word, she thought. Its meaning had shifted a lot in the last 24 hours. The memory didn't come back immediately. In fragments at first, the gray morning light, the coffee in the window, the child, the hood, the gunshot, the fall. But everything else was covered by a thick veil. No one told her directly what had happened. The nurses confined themselves to duty phrases. "You were brought in with a gunshot wound, you've been operated on, you're stable now." No one said who she saved. or if she'd saved anyone at all. She sensed there was a silence all around. Too many waited answers. Too many looks that were quickly averted. On the third day after the surgery, when she was moved from the intensive care unit to a private room, a tall man in a dark suit with a thin gray tie walked into the room. He held a massive bouquet of white hydrangeas and a small envelope. He introduced himself, Edward Levis, attorney at law. Said he was representing a man whose name he couldn't say out loud. He was listed as OH in the papers. Jessica frowned. The acronym didn't tell her anything. The lawyer placed the flowers on the bedside table, handed over the envelope and, smiling demurely, walked out. Not one extra word. Not a glance in her eyes. Inside the envelope was a short note printed on heavy paper with no logos. "Thank you for what you did. It wouldn't be the same without you. When you're ready, let me know. I'd like to talk." There was no signature. No name, no contact info. Just a note, through a lawyer. Jessica put the note back in the envelope and hid it under her pillow. For the first time in ages, she felt genuinely uneasy. Because this letter, it wasn't a thank you, but the beginning of something she didn't yet understand. That same night, 2 detectives came to see her. One was silent, the other spoke in a curt, formal tone. They talked about the assassination attempt, that the suspect in the attack had been apprehended. Identity was being withheld. Motives are still unclear. The investigation is confidential. Jessica was asked to describe what she saw. But she didn't say anything. Not because she wanted to hide the truth, but because she didn't understand what exactly had happened. She saw the gun, the kid, the jump. But the rest of it was a blur. They left disgruntled. She was left with a throbbing pain and an inner sense that she was part of something bigger than a random shootout. On the 5th day after the shooting, a television came on in the room. The news alternated, but one channel had a lingering splash screen: "Oliver Hunt has disappeared. The head of Hunt Media has been out of contact since Monday morning. He was last seen in the South Side neighborhood." Jessica dropped the remote. The name pierced like a second bullet. She remembered that face, calm, focused, with a newspaper in his hands. It had been him. He was the one she'd covered with herself. And now he was gone. The news had said nothing about the shooting, about the killer in custody. Just the disappearance. Mysterious. They discussed theories: kidnapping, staging, deal breaker. But not a word about the girl who jumped in front of the bullet. Later that day, the door to the room opened abruptly. Jessica's mother ran in, tired, disheveled, eyes full of tears. She had flown in from Austin on the first flight as soon as she'd heard about the injury. When she saw her daughter in bandages and IVs, she froze, not knowing where to turn from the pain. Jessica nodded silently. Tears were coming up too, but she held on. "Mom," she said quietly when her mother finally sat down next to her, "I think I saved the wrong person." Mother didn't understand. But she didn't ask. She just took her hand as if to bring her back to earth. Jessica didn't know which side of the truth she was on. But one thing was certain: there was more behind that shot than she'd been told. On the 7th day after the shooting, when the pain had dulled to a muffled tugging heaviness and the bandages had begun to itch from the sticking gauze, a box was delivered to Jessica's room. A courier in a hospital delivery uniform handed it over silently, unsigned, only labeled, "Important. Personal. Not to be opened without the addressee." The box was black, matte, about the size of a book. Inside was a tightly packed envelope and a photograph. A real one, printed on glossy paper. The image was simple: a kiosk on the corner, morning, dawn light, Oliver Hunt with coffee in his hand, and in the frame, just off to the side, her. Jessica, one step away from jumping, her bag already rolled off her shoulder, her eyes on the businessman's back. That was a second before the shot. Someone was filming. Someone knew there would be a moment. And they waited. The photo cut to the bone. Not just because it was proof, but because in her own eyes in the photo was something she'd never seen in herself: a determination bordering on insanity. The envelope inside contained only coordinates and a time: Friday. 1500 hours. 421 Sunset Drive. Pass secured. The signature was the same: OH. She hesitated. Over 24 hours. The doctors recommended rest. The psychologist advised no outside influences to load herself up. Her mother was silent, but she looked at Jessie with an anxiety that was more than just fear for her health. On the day indicated in the note, half an hour before the time, she sat at the window and watched the cars pull out of the parking lot. And when a dark gray Tesla with tinted windows appeared, she knew it was behind her. The man with the glasses got out first. Tall, dark coat, well-groomed, smooth-talking. Introduced himself: Marcus Shelby. Said he was Hunt's press secretary. Asked him to get dressed and take a ride. No pressure. Mr. Hunt would like to speak in person. Jessica put on her jacket and went. The ride lasted 40 minutes. Outside the windows the neighborhoods changed, taking them farther and farther away from the city. The landscape leveled out into a succession of private properties and then wooded hills and lakes. The house was not a mansion but rather a mini estate. Stone columns, floor-to-ceiling windows, guards at the gate, but no outward pretentiousness. Marcus led her inside. They passed a long hallway, a library, another corridor, and stopped at a wooden door without a sign. He knocked, opened it, nodded for her to enter. Hunt was sitting in a deep armchair by the window. Not in a suit but in a dark cardigan with a book on his lap. He looked a dozen years older than he had in a week. There were shadows under his eyes, his face was pale, and his fingers were clutching the armrest. He looked up, nodded briefly. "I didn't think you'd agree." The voice was husky. "Are you okay?" he asked almost reflexively. Jessica nodded, not answering aloud. She sat down across from him on the edge of the leather couch. Silence hung between them. Hunt set the book aside. "I was taken out right after the shooting. It was planned. But your act, it changed everything. I should have been in the line of fire. I was going to be taken out." Jessica squeezed the armrest. He continued, "You didn't just save my life. You delayed the wave. The one that was brewing. If I'd been taken out, there would have been a chain reaction in the media. Panic. A breakdown of trust. You didn't just stop a bullet. You gave time." He stood up, walked across the room, stopped by the fireplace. "But I can't go back into the public space. It's impossible right now. There are too many risks. That's why I work from the shadows." He turned around. "I want to offer you a choice. There is money. There's a lot of it. You can take it and just disappear. Build another life. Or you can be part of a new initiative. One that will protect people like you. One that will change how we treat those who come forward when the rest of us run." He didn't give details. No plans, no structures, no mechanisms. Just hints. Just an idea. Jessica listened without moving. Her head was buzzing. Too much in a short period of time. Too abstract. When she left the room, Marcus was already waiting. The driver opened the door silently. The entire ride back passed in silence. On her lap lay the same picture. The one with the jump. The one where reality had changed. And she still didn't know why. 3 months had passed. The pain was gone, leaving behind a slight burning sensation in her left arm and a thin, almost imperceptible scar under her collarbone that reminded her every morning that she was still here. Jessica refused the money. Not right away, not with pathos. She simply called the number Marcus had left on her business card and said briefly, "No," then she disconnected her phone and deleted her email. That was the end of it. She was back in the hospital, but not in her room. She was teaching now. Young Green, not yet broken. Teaching them how to hold a patient's hand when fear is stronger than pain. How to talk to a mother who's lost a child. How not to forget you're human even on a 15-hour shift. The hospital school was noisy, smelling of coffee, antiseptic and marker. Students sometimes recognized her, asked awkwardly, "Are you the one?" She nodded but said nothing more. The story grew with details that didn't exist in reality. The internet discussed her heroism, attributed her military service, CIA connections, and political motivation. One blogger even claimed she was Hunt's mistress. Jessica only smiled tiredly. The very essence had long since dissolved into myth. Meanwhile, the reality remained much simpler. The girl in the cheap jacket saw the weapon and stepped forward. Her mother was not happy about her decision to stay in the city. She'd urged her to leave if only for a while, talked about safety, packed her suitcase, but Jessica wouldn't back down. Something had changed in her. Not ostentatious, not demonstrative, but internal. It was as if that second before the gunshot had forever rearranged her idea of fear. One evening, as she was leaving the school building, carrying a thermos and notebooks in her hand, she was called out. On the corner stood a guy in a dark windbreaker with a tape recorder in his hand. He looked like a student, disheveled hair, backpack, sneakers. He introduced himself quickly, said he was working on a documentary for an independent studio, and mentioned a name Jessica had heard somewhere, perhaps on the news, about the leaks. He didn't stall. He said he was studying the information shadow, what was behind the official reports, what didn't make it to the airwaves. And that the Hunt story wasn't just an assassination attempt. He showed her the tablet. On the screen, a transcript of the audio file. Conversations. The voices are distorted, but the phrasing is distinct. One says, "If he signs the papers in time, we'll have no leverage in November." The other replies, then he has to disappear. There will be minimal attention in this district. Staging 3 minutes. Then the coordinates. Approximate route. Driver's name matched the police report from the day of the attack. It took Jessica a moment to realize she was listening. This wasn't a revenge killing. It was an attempt to stop the signing of an agreement between Hunt and a cybersecurity-related government agency. The document was rumored to cut off dozens of contracts with outside contractors. Control over information flows, social media analysis, data manipulation. She listened again. And again. Part of her wanted to stop the guy, to say, "Stop, I don't need this." But another part of her realized, it explained too much. Why the assassination attempt was in the morning. Why no one was talking about it officially. Why Hunt had disappeared. Why everything looked like an accident, a random victim, a heroic nurse. The guy turned off the screen, said he couldn't show any more. His source was taking a risk. But he added, "You weren't just a witness. You moved the line." And walked away. Quickly, as if he knew he'd already said too much. Jessica stood at the corner for a long time, gripping the strap of the thermos. Her head was buzzing. The world around her hadn't changed, the same cars, the same streetlights, the same sidewalks. But something clicked inside her. She realized, it wasn't a shot at a person. It was a shot at a pattern. And she, with no name, no titles, no connections, stood in that moment between the shot and something much bigger than herself. But if all of this was true, then the only question left was, who gave the order to take out Oliver Hunt? And what happens if they realize the shot missed its target? The hall was small, without pathos, without orchestras, without buffet tables and TV cameras. The lights were dimmed, the rows of chairs were clear, simple, black. The banners along the walls are gray and blue, with the Nurse Line logo, no faces, just silhouettes and one short slogan: those who hold their hand when everyone else lets go. This foundation grew from nothing. From the scar under her collarbone. From the money Jessica had once rejected and then received back in a different form. An anonymous transfer to the initiative's account, with a signature on the cover letter, "Have it your way." She stood backstage holding the speech sheet, but she wasn't going to read it. The words had lived in her head for a long time. Her body didn't shake like it had the first time after the ICU when she'd first stepped outside. There were no celebrities here, no politicians. Just nurses, a couple of paramedics from a rural clinic in Iowa, 2 volunteers from a support program for burned-out emergency workers. And someone she couldn't see but felt. Someone sitting among them, unnoticed, unseen. He's there. The lights are aimed at the stage. Jessica comes out. Quiet. No flashes, no applause. Just the creak of floorboards. She stands up to the microphone, looks around the room and speaks. One day she says, "You're walking to work down the same street you always walk down. But the bus breaks down. The weather is different. You take a wrong turn. And in 1 second, you're faced with a choice no one prepared you for. You don't know who's in front of you. Who's right? Who's lying? Who's manipulating? All you have is instinct. Forward motion. And you go. You just go." She's not talking about heroism. She's talking about the line between fear and action, people who make choices every day. The ones who stay when others run. She doesn't mention Hunt. Doesn't talk about the assassination attempt. Just the silence that comes after a gunshot. The one where you're left alone, wondering if it was worth it. The answer doesn't come right away. Sometimes never. After the speech, no applause, no handshakes. Just one moment. As she leaves the auditorium, she is handed a small envelope. Unmarked. Inside is a flash drive. Small, black, embossed with the words, "Not for broadcast." She doesn't ask who handed it over. She doesn't need to. She goes back to the hotel, plugs the flash drive into her laptop, and almost immediately a single file pops up. A video. The folder is dated a week before the assassination attempt. She opens it. The image appears slowly darkened, grainy. Oliver Hunt. The office. He's looking at the camera, hands on the desk. Not posing. Just talking. His voice is steady. If you're watching this, it means something didn't go according to plan. He pauses. Then continues. Says he knew the assassination attempt was being prepared. Knew he was being targeted through fake contractors. He says he decided not to cancel the meeting. That he wanted to strike first. To break the chain, to pull those who were playing the long game out of the shadows. "I knew," he says, "that I needed to be in the open. To make them come. To make a mistake." He says it without emotion. Not an ounce of remorse. Then looks directly into the camera and adds, "I knew someone would be there. A random one. Who would stand up. There's always someone who stands up. I just hoped that someone would survive. The last sentence is already a whisper. Thank you. Jessica turns off the video. Sits in silence. For a long time. No tears. No words. Not because there are no feelings. It's because she already had them. Back when she was standing in the alley watching a boy pick out gum. Fate. Or an accident. What is she a pawn? A random victim in someone else's game? Or is it more than that? The next morning she walks along the waterfront. The lake is flat, the lights still on the horizon. The wind plays with the strands of her hair. In her pocket is the same flash drive. She doesn't hesitate. She just takes it out, looks into the water, and throws it. A short arc, a slight splash. It's empty. She smiles. Not because she's found the truth. It's because she stopped waiting for it. She chose not to know everything. She chose to live. She chose to be. Not a symbol, not a pawn, not a savior, a person. Jessica walks along the shore, not quickening her pace. Somewhere out there, in the foundation building, a new day begins. The people she chose to support work there. Who will one day also stand on that very edge. And who will take a step. The way she did. Without knowing the truth. Just because her heart tells her to. And that's the only truth that matters. Dear viewers, thank you for being with us. Subscribe to the channel, like us, and be sure to write in the comments what you think of this story. Don't forget to click on the bell, so you don't miss new interesting stories. See you soon.